I'm elated to have the opportunity to speak with you about team-based learning today. And I want to begin by introducing you to the person who made it possible for all of us here at University of Wyoming to become a little more well-versed in team-based learning. Julie Estes is a consultant for the Team-Based Learning Collaborative. And last summer, she joined us for the Learning Actively Mentoring Program Summer Institute. You should definitely all apply if you haven't already for this next year's LAMP Summer Institute and year-long training. But Julie is one of many consultants for the Team-Based Learning Collaborative, and University of Wyoming, we now have a membership to this TBL group, and we have access to resources. So as we go through this, if you get super jazzed on it, of course, find me for more resources. I want to tell you just a little bit about TBL as a specific active learning strategy. It begins with the construction of diverse teams. So I like to get information from my students before the semester even starts. I like to have them fill out a Google form and tell me about themselves. I like to know not only about their scholastic pursuits, but also their outside passions. I get enough information from the students that I can put them into diverse teams composed of about 5 to 7 students. Now, it depends a little bit on the size of class you have. Maybe you're going to be closer to 5 if you have a smaller class. I have classes that are larger and in the past have used up to 6 or 7 students in a team. But we know that teams that have greater diversity come to more creative, more innovative solutions to problems. So the problem solving aspect of team-based learning is huge. So you want to see if you can maximize diversity, as well as you possibly can to allow your students to really make good decisions in their problem solving. Students then remain in the same teams for the entire semester. That's a little bit strange for folks to get used to. They often think, no, you want to, let them experience new teams. In fact, what we find is that they come to form a stronger and stronger cohort with time. And this is often a cohort that then follows them vertically throughout the rest of their career. I've seen students remain in these cohorts for future classes and choose to take future classes together. So a TBL class is definitely a flipped class. That is, a flipped class is where you ask students to prepare outside of class, doing some of the mundane type things before they get to class, and then focusing in on the real problem solving during class. So in order to make sure students are ready for class, we all have to get ready with some sort of class planning to give them their out-of-class preparation. I call this the pre-party. So I make a set of tasks that students work through before coming to class. I tell them you never want to come to the party without first pre-partying, and I hold them to that. I give them permission to prioritize that class preparation. Part of the way we give them permission to prioritize is by giving them a readiness assurance test at the beginning of every class. Now that can look different, and we'll talk about variations on that theme, but that readiness assurance test gives them permission to prioritize getting ready for class. How many of you have talked to a cohort in your department and they say, students never read their textbook? Well, oftentimes we don't give them permission to prioritize that because in class we just re-lecture on the same things that the students have prepared. And so with time, they're conditioned away from preparing for class. So we have to give them permission to prioritize that. And then the third part of a TBL class is the application activities, actually allowing students the time to sit down and solve real problems that are related to and apply whatever it is that we've asked them to get ready with prior to the class. So in my class, we use the pre-party approach for out-of-class preparation, and I heavily use YO courses to disseminate the pre-party. So I also do something that is maybe a little different than other TBL classes. I give the students the learning outcomes, and I actually will ask them to reflect upon those learning outcomes as part of their readiness assurance test. So they know what it is that I want them to be able to do. But then I provide them with resources. If they can't already do what a learning outcome asks them to do, I give them videos, or I give them reading, I give them preparation material that will let them come to class ready to go. They have the foundational concepts. And you can do lots of different ways. I like making podcasts, as you can see, but there are other ways to do that. You can have them look even at PowerPoint slides prior to coming to class. So the mundane is done outside of class to make the class filled with action. And part of that action is the readiness assurance process. In most TBL classrooms, that begins with an individual readiness assurance test called the IRAT. The IRAT can be done in a few different ways, but one really cool way to do the IRAT is to have students wager based upon their confidence. They wager their points. So you give them a set of questions, maybe 10 questions, and they look at those questions, and based on the pre-party materials, they should be able to answer those questions, but they may be more or less confident in their answers. So what they can do is they can say, okay, I am so sure on question number 1, I am so sure that the answer is B. I'm going to wager all of my points on B. So I'm going to go ahead and put 5 points into answer B. Or maybe they get to question 2 and they think, boy, I am a little uncertain. I know the answer's not A, and I know the answer's not E or D, but I feel really split on B and C. So they can wager points there, and they can say, I'm going to give 3 points to B and 2 points to C. And see how I come out in the end of the day there. And they can wager in different ways. So maybe they feel like number 3, they feel pretty confident on A, but then they think, well, gosh, it could be D, and they can wager their points in a different distribution. So we'll have you all take an IRAT and then the corresponding team test that goes next. So after the individual readiness assurance test, they hand that in, they give you that test, and then they go on to the team readiness assurance test, or the TRAT. So for the TRAT, we typically give immediate feedback. So as students come together with a team, we know that they will come to better answers than any one individual in the group could come up with. So this is actually really important to tell your overachieving students, because some of them say, oh no, I don't like this team stuff. I'm going to be dragged down by the rest of the team. In fact, all evidence shows that the team decision will be stronger than the strongest person in the group. So that means that everyone is lifted up in the team process. And of course, your great students, they're lifted up when they are asked to teach. We know how much more you learn when you start teaching. So for the TRAT, they actually have these if-at cards. So these if-at cards are scratch cards with immediate feedback. There's a star under the right answer. So here's one that you can see from my students where on some of those questions they were very certain, but then on others they really didn't come to the correct answer without scratching off a few of the options first. So the TRAT is then done together as a team. You can see my fellows over in the right-hand corner from last summer institute scratching off the if-at cards. So these are called if-at cards. They're scratch cards. So the team readiness assurance test goes next. Now, in many team-based learning classrooms, the instructors open this up for an appeal. So for example, I allow my students, and on this one that you saw where they had the frowny face on there, where they just didn't know, they can provide on the back of the card, they can tell me why they answered what they did and tell me where in the pre-party materials they got their information. So they have to ground their appeal, but you can certainly allow them to appeal. This is also a great place for a mini lecture. So if you've collected, say, the IRATs and you can see where students, you don't even have to grade them to see where students were uncertain, because you can see how they were wagering their points and you can see which concepts they were uncertain on. And so while they're working on the team readiness assurance test, you could be getting ready to do a tiny mini lecture on the concepts that they showed uncertainty. So rather than having to lecture on every single thing again, all you need to do is to hit those points where uncertainty still lives. So mini lectures, rather than dominating the class, become a small portion of it. The next portion of the TBL process is in-class activities. Now, these in-class activities for most TBL classes are guided by what are called the 4S framework. Now, this 4S framework, you can find out more about it. The University of British Columbia puts out an Introduction to Team-Based Learning handout, and it gives you a little more information on that I'd be glad to provide as well. But these have this 4S framework stands for a problem that is significant. That's the first S. The problem is the same. The problem has a specific choice. And when students are ready to report, they report simultaneously. Let's start with the last one. You can see here my fellows reporting simultaneously. You'll notice that they didn't agree here, so that could open for discussion. So they would hold up that card at the same time, or all the students would weigh in on a poll at the same time, maybe electronically, or everyone would put up their drawings on the wall at the same time. So that simultaneous report can take lots of forms. The idea of a significant problem makes a lot of sense, and significant problems can really vary. For example, in my biological chemistry class, one of the significant problems we took on after having pre-party materials on acid conjugate base buffering pairs, we then talked about climate change and ocean acidification, and we looked at the bicarbonate buffer system. And then that was a very significant problem that allowed us to then apply our knowledge of buffers and of conjugate base acid pairs. And so we could draw titration curves for something really, really significant. So this notion of the same problem, that's actually something that when I first learned team-based learning was new to me, that rather than having each individual team work on a different problem, you want them to all work on the same problem. In large part, this enables them then to have more meaningful discussion when we come back together with that simultaneous report. Now, that doesn't mean that they may not take these things in very different directions. It doesn't mean we're talking about closed questions either. And just because there's a specific choice doesn't mean we're talking about closed questions either. There's always room for a lot of rich discussion and rich conversation. So this gets you started on the basics of team-based learning, but in your session, you're going to be doing even more and talking with some incredible educators who were part of my summer institute this last summer, and they're going to talk to you about derivations on a theme. For example, when I do the IRAT in my class, rather than this standard kind of IRAT, I actually use, rather than this, I actually use a rich reflective notebooking process where I ask the students to actually tell me how they're doing with the learning outcomes that I provided in the pre-party. And then I ask them to ask me two very critical thought-based questions that show their transference skills. So you could modify the IRAT to fit what was right for your class and for your discipline, but there's a lot of ways to apply these core ideas of team-based learning. So I look forward to hearing more from you, and I hope you have a radtastic team-based learning day.